Penn State fans, Bob Flounders, Johnny McGonigal here. Mid-April Monday, still a little bit chilly. Penn State's about halfway done spring drills. We've had some news over the weekend and late last week we need to get to. We need to talk about a player that has left the program. We need to talk about what's looming via the transfer portal. Johnny, we're going to talk about a Penn State verbal commitment that I think is a big piece of Penn State's future. But first off, how are you enjoying this lovely month of April? And it was a big Sunday for you. I know you're a big Rory McIlroy guy. He did not make it easy on himself. I think he almost gave that tournament. I thought he gave that tournament away late, but kudos to him. He's a grand slammer. Well, I think the sixth guy, so I'm sure it was a good Sunday for you.
Yeah, for anyone who's a Rory fan, I'll take you back to Thursday, Bob. When me and Max recorded, he asked me for my Masters prediction, and I didn't give him Rory because I just didn't want to put it out there in the ether. I didn't want to be burned. I was on the edge of my seat all Sunday as he messed up and then had a ridiculous shot in on par fives. Messed up, did it again. It was just unbelievable. And it was never going to be easy, right, for him to finally win a Masters. So really cool to see that, see his reaction. I thought Justin Rose played phenomenal down the stretch for us in that playoff. But, really fun Masters Sunday, one of the best we've had in a really long time. And, excited to talk some Penn State football with you.
Yeah. Rory, I think Rory doubled the first hole, double bogey, and then it was just streaky. And He made the shots he needed too late.
Yeah, some of the shot from behind the trees, the full-fledged swing he had there to get it that close on was ridiculous. For him to, missing that putt on 18 and then having to recoup and reevaluate and, feels like probably your blood leaves your body. You're just lifeless. How did I miss that? And then to, refocus and birdie the playoff hole was pretty impressive. It was pretty impressive. So, very, very happy. Very happy.
All right, Johnny, I think there's a couple of Penn State media availabilities still left on our plate until the blue-white game in a couple of Saturdays. But let's get to some news. I instead of starting with the recruiting, let's just start with, I don't know how you felt about that, but the news that JB Nelson is no longer with the team, a veteran interior offensive lineman who could also play outside. I think really last significant football for him at Penn State was 2023. I think he's dealt with some injuries, but I talked to Venga Ione a little while ago, and he was working at left guard with the first team, but I know they also really like Cooper Cousins. Venga was actually working at right guard. They're without some players, but now they are without JB Nelson. Kind of a surprise, but I guess maybe not really. There's a couple ways you could look at it. But what do you think this means for the Penn State offensive line? Because it is a blow. They do like some of their young players, but I went into spring, Johnny, thinking this as much as the running back room is talented and they have Drew back, I was kind of thinking that if they were healthy, the offensive line might be the best thing about the 2025 football team, and it still might be true. Cooper Cousins might be a guy that just comes in and is a revelation, but this one caught me off guard.
Yeah, caught me a little off guard, but at the same time, not totally surprised when you look at the depth that they have in that group. And you mentioned it being such a strength, Bob. It's because they've got 4 out of 5 starters back, and filling in for the one starter who's no longer with the team. Sal Wormley running out of eligibility. You've got options like JB Nelson and Cooper Cousins. Cooper Cousins, a guy who, has been praised since he stepped foot on campus last winter and has done everything right to this point. And certainly with JB moving on, looks like he'll be starting at guard for this team come the fall. And so if you're JB Nelson, and if you kind of see, maybe he saw the writing on the wall, maybe it was obvious that, Cooper would start and he wouldn't on the interior offensive line. And you're an older guy at this point in your career, and you're good enough to be a plug-and-play starter elsewhere, in a power conference. I don't blame him at all for making that decision. And really, as we barrel towards the spring portal window, which officially opens on Wednesday, offensive line was one of the positions that I was looking at as a potential poaching spot, for other teams, given the depth and given the talent along that offensive line. And Penn State was, will have to continue to make sure that guys don't leave that group. And so, it is a blow. It is a loss. Because if something happens, to say JB didn't start, right, and he was going to be the swing guy at guard and tackle, and someone gets hurt, you would have loved to have a guy of his experience and caliber to fill in, but not totally surprised by his decision.
Yeah, it's really and it's like the second time this offseason, like it was just the timing of it, but I get you, the portal is opening. The Smith-Vilbert decision kind of, at a position of real need, that I don't think that was great for Penn State, but they like their young edge rushers. But this one, they have the depth, I think, to kind of overcome this. I mean, they played last year without him, so but it just, if anything, now that's just one less talented body that they have. Who knows what they're going to do in the portal? But you talked about it. So when you look at this weird transfer portal situation and you look what's happening nationwide, would it surprise you if Penn State gets, use the word poached, but would it surprise you if they lost a really key piece maybe? And I know there's some uncertainty and there's money involved, but I think you have to think that James and his staff and his program have been kind of preparing for this. I don't know that they'll be caught off guard, but it'll be interesting to see who are the targets maybe that other schools have when it comes to Penn State.
Yeah, I would be surprised if you're talking about like key contributors like a Nick Singleton or Katron Allen, Denai, Zane, like the players that announced that they were coming back and not leaving for the NFL draft. I would be very surprised if they lost a player of that caliber and of that importance to the team, because in terms of the financials and stuff, when they were mulling their NFL decisions, like Penn State ponied up for those guys to make coming back to Penn State an easier decision for them. But also they have that collective drive to win a national championship. And unless you're going to Georgia or Ohio State, like you'd be hard pressed to find a team that is in better position to contend for a national title this upcoming season than Penn State. And so, maybe losing a player like they lost last year, like King Mack. And of course, he comes back, which is funny how things work out sometimes. But, a surprising guy like that, maybe, at cornerback is a position I'm looking at. We already mentioned offensive line, but cornerback, we know the talent in that room. AJ Harris is a lockdown starter on the outside on one end. It looks like Elliott Washington is going to be the guy on the other end with the offseason he's put together. But I don't know, a guy like Aldavian Collins or, even some of the younger players, John Mitchell, guys like that in that room that probably feel like they're good enough to play and start elsewhere. Not saying that they will transfer, but that is a position that I'm looking at. If I'm another school, maybe in the Power 4 conferences, but I'm not quite Penn State's level, and if you need help at corner, Penn State's got a lot of talent and a lot of depth at corner. So that's one position that I'm really keeping an eye on as the portal opens here in a couple of days, and teams will undoubtedly try to poach some players from Penn State.
Absolutely. Moving along here on the blue-white breakdown with Bob Flounders, Johnny McGonigal. Here's something that with the portal coming open, I can't help but circle back to something Pat Kraft said at his news conference, in the winter, and he kind of volunteered it. He said, we need a wideout. Everyone knows we need a wideout. So when he says something like that, would you be stunned if they are not in the hunt for one, or if maybe things are progressing nicely with the guys they have, and maybe they feel it might be a good sign if they are not in hot pursuit of one? How do you look at that? Because I was kind of surprised that Pat said that. I don't know why he said it, but it is true, and I'm just wondering how aggressive do you expect Penn State to be maybe at that position?
Yeah, It didn't catch me off guard that he said it because he's an honest guy
Yeah.
about everything. He's upfront about everything, and I think anyone who has watched Penn State football over the last 2 years knows that wide receiver has been that Achilles heel, that thorn in the side, really. So it's unfortunate though the timing of the portal because it opens on Wednesday, it closes on the 25th for entries, right? And Penn State's blue white game is on the 26th. They're still going through spring camp. They just got Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson out of the winter portal, and they've been able to see these guys in practice for what, 8, 9 practices, something like that. The 7th was last Tuesday when we were up there. And so it's hard to come to a conclusion if you're Penn State saying, like, we're really comfortable with the receivers that we have after 7, 8, 9 spring practices. So I would be surprised. I would be pretty shocked, actually, if they weren't in the hunt for 1 or 2 receivers. Now, again, a part of that too is like, is the talent going to be out there? Because we know that
Right.
for the most part, in terms of the high profile players that enter the portal and ultimately leave their schools for another, the pool is much bigger in the winter. And so is there going to be a difference maker or two out there that Penn State feels will elevate the room? And that's from our receivers are doing well, or maybe it's just like the guy just isn't out there for us to, worth spending our money on and our time on and our investment on. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this portal plays out at the wide receiver position and why it plays out the way that it does ultimately.
Yeah, and the other thing is you add a receiver this late. I mean, there's a learning curve, right? Like he's still, I know their schedule is pretty easy early in the season, but he's still got if they would add somebody, I mean, it would be, he would literally have to be on the fast track, but they would have some games to look at this player. But I just think after what Pat Kraft said, I kind of fully expect them to go get one. I don't know who it's going to be, but I think it's pretty interesting just to see how it's going to shake out, Johnny. But let's move along here and talk about Penn State recruiting, the class.
One thing before we do that, Bob. One thing, because just one other position I wanted to mention on the poaching end, because we talked about cornerback on the offensive side of the ball. I think running back is a really interesting situation too.
Yeah,
because we've talked about it before. When Nick and Katron decided to come back, obviously that's huge for Penn State, and they would take that 10 times out of 10, 11 times out of 10. But then you look at the guys behind them, and it's Quentin Martin, it's Corey Smith as redshirt freshman.
Yeah.
You've got Tyke Hayes already in the program. You've got Jabri Wallace-Coleman coming in as a summer enrollee. You've got Cam Wallace, who dealt with a long-term injury that he suffered last fall. And so that's a pretty crowded room. And does a school come in and say, hey, come get 10 carries a game for us right away, as opposed to having to wait it out because Katron and Nick are going to take the significant bulk of the carries for this upcoming season. So just another position to keep an eye on, and wouldn't be surprised to see one of those guys head out the door.
Yep, and they can afford to, not afford to, they don't want to, but I mean, if they get dinged by and lose one of their young backs, I think that's just when Katron and Nick decided to come back. I mean, that there could have been some collateral damage there, but hey, we'll see how it plays out, Johnny. Let's just talk recruiting real quick. 2026, 4-star quarterback from the Lehigh Valley, my neck of the woods, Peyton Falzone, great name, Nazareth area high school. I know it well. 4-star kid, and they need some quarterbacks. That you can't have enough good talented quarterbacks. I think he's a 4-star kid. Drew's on his in his last season. They like Grunk. I'm not sure where they are with the backup right now, but Jackson Smolik, James continues to praise him and says it's close. We'll see about that, but this is a guy they wanted. They kept an in-state kid, and for them to kind of continue to build what looks like a very promising 2026 class just speaks well, I think, to the future of Penn State football, and to keep one of the better prospects in-state at Penn State, I think is important as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Payton, he's the second quarterback in this 2026 class, along with Troy Hoon from, out in California. Yep. And it's going to be, if that holds true, if both of those guys ultimately sign, it'll be the first 2 quarterback class that Penn State has had since Bo and Drew signed in 2022. We know that they love Ethan Grunkmeyer. He was the backup during the CFP run when Bo entered the portal. Jackson Smolik in the mix. Beckham Kritza signed in the 2025 class and enrolled early. So an interesting spot for that room as it moves forward. With Peyton Falzone specifically, previously committed to Virginia Tech. He was looked at by some schools as a safety, as not necessarily a quarterback, but Penn State, he's expected to play quarterback at Penn State, and had taken visits elsewhere, Iowa, Ohio State, some other high-profile programs, and to keep a player like him, an in-state player like him at home and in-state is a big deal, for Penn State. I just, you talk about poaching with the portal. I mean, who knows if we're looking a year down the line and, say Peyton and Troy are signed and in the class, is Beckham Kritza going to be in this program long-term, or Jackson, or Ethan? You can never have too many quarterbacks, especially now, with how frequently quarterbacks move in the portal and leave their schools after a year or two. Good sign for this class and for the program to have two in the 2026 class.
Absolutely. One more thing I wanted to get to with you here on the Blue White Breakdown is I've been taking note of it, and I'm sure you have. Max Ralph has as well. Jim Knowles, defenders of the day. So he's been handing out these awards on social media to some Penn State standouts, and he's trying to do it. I think he's syncing it up so every practice there's a guy or there's two guys, and it's pretty much. It's been all defensive backs, and it's been a couple of defensive linemen. I think he did this at Ohio State, right? James says he's a man of few words. You see him, he's always watching. We don't get to see a lot of him because what else is going on in the rooms. But just your thoughts on maybe how he is playing this out. Originally, I was like, wow, that's weird. There's no linebackers on this list, but I'm thinking, well, first of all, Rojas is hurt and he can't practice. And, Dom is a guy that probably he's a big piece to the defense. And I don't know how much he's working. And some of the young linebackers, I think, are still figuring some things out. I don't even know how many 3 linebacker sets we're going to see. That's another fascinating thing. But just the breakdown of who he singled out. You can tell he's been very happy with, you mentioned Audavian Collins. I think it's great that Zariah Fisher has gotten some notice. They need him desperately to play a role in the defensive end room. They need him to stay healthy, which has been an issue. He singled out Max Granville most recently, but it's been DBs and it's been edge rushers. Xavier Gilliam is another guy I should give him. He's been a guy that I think I'm putting together some spring storylines halfway through Penn State spring. I think his emergence is a storyline because Devon J. Thomas mentioned him, and so did James. He was the first guy that got mentioned when you talked about young defensive tackles and defensive linemen. So, any thoughts on what Jim Knowles is doing and kind of how it's playing out?
Yeah, I think Zariah Fisher getting some recognition is a really good sign. And that's one where, he's coming off, I believe, a second season-ending, long-term injury, 6-year senior at a spot where they need someone to step up. You have Denai Dennis-Sutton coming back, but you've got Abdul Carter off to the NFL. Amin Vanover had his NCAA waiver for another year denied, so he won't be back. You've got, like you mentioned earlier in the pod, Smith Bilbert heading out the door via the portal, which was a bit of a surprise. So, Zariah Fisher, if he's able to stay healthy for a guy who has dealt with the injuries that he's dealt with, but to have a role and to have a bigger role as potentially a starter opposite Denai Dennis-Sutton, Max Granville, the kid's a budding star. The signs have been there for him to take a big step. But defensive end, D tackle, 2 areas that beyond receiver, if you're looking what positions could Penn State look to target in the transfer portal? If there are instant contributors out there at those spots, wouldn't be surprised at all. Also at D end, Anai White, it's been a little quiet on him, but the Texas A&M transfer who came in the winter, something to keep an eye on there. as well. Love to see it for Xavier Gilliam, because you look at, who's going to start next to Zane Durant. And James Franklin last week said that really the top tier of D tackles so far, it's Zane Durant, and then Alonzo Ford, who's not out there, recovering from a season-ending injury suffered late in the season last year, and Xavier Gilliam. And then you've got a big crop of guys, younger guys, who are competing kind of for that 4th and 5th spot in the rotation. And so good to see those D linemen really catch the eye of Jim Knowles, who has taken he doesn't have a position tag on him. He's not linebackers coach in addition to D coordinator or anything like that. He's been kind of just roving around the position groups, keeping a close eye, but just, taking mental notes on who's standing out and recognizing those guys on social media, which is nice to see. But something to keep in mind, that those guys are getting recognized now, not only for, the upcoming season, but when we talk about potential transfer additions in a matter of days, where those players could, factor in, given potential changes to the roster.
Yeah. And one more for you. I almost forgot. I know you have a story up on PennLive. You had a chance, I think, last week to talk to Danny O'Brien, Penn State's quarterbacks coach. And there's traces now with the program working with the quarterbacks too. And you wonder if maybe Danny's looking over his shoulder at a guy that's an all-timer at Penn State, 2016, all that stuff, 3-year starter, clutch kid, dual threat. But it's, reading your story and listening to Danny, sounds like, the more Penn State can add to the coaching the quarterbacks on the staff. James Franklin, former quarterback as well. He thinks it's better for the position because it's so important. But you didn't get the sense that he's like, this guy's pretty good. I don't know what it sounds like. It sounds like they have a very good relationship.
Yeah. I didn't get that sense at all. I had asked Danny, I was like, look, this is Trace's first foray into coaching. Like, what's it like having him around? How has he been? And one thing that Danny said, which was interesting, is he said, this isn't like a title thing where I'm the quarterback's coach and Trace is the assistant quarterback's coach, and I talk first and then he waits until I'm done so he gets to talk. It's been very collaborative. Danny used the word empowering him to speak up and to have an influence and an early impact on that quarterback room, because it's one of those where their job is to make these guys better. And, Danny O'Brien has a lot of experience. He's been building up to this in his career. I believe this is 4th year, maybe 5th year with the program, 2nd year, really as the quarterback's coach. And Trace has NFL experience. He's worked with head coaches like John Harbaugh and Tomlin and Belichick and, quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson. So he's got a lot of NFL experience and learning from a lot of different people that he can bring to the room. And it's just a different perspective. And those guys seem to get on really well, get along. And it's only a positive, only a good thing for not only Drew Aller, but you look at the younger quarterbacks like Ethan Grunkmeyer and Smolik and Beckham Kritza, who, watching Trace at practice over the last couple of weeks, he's been working closely with the backups and the younger guys. So, all good signs there.
All right. I think that's a wrap on this episode of the Blue White Breakdown. Bob Flounders with Johnny McGonigal. There's a media availability this week, Penn State fans, so look for plenty of coverage on Penn State spring practice sessions. We're going to get some coaches and players to chat with. It'll be me, Max, Ralph, Johnny, and also as Johnny, be on the lookout for Johnny's transfer portal primer. I think I said that right, but that'll be coming up because it opens very soon. Penn State should be active, and we'll be curious to see if they lose any more key pieces like JB Nelson.